Actually, there are a lot of questions, so could you maybe keep your answer short to about 1 minute? Well, I was not really the one who made the decision, so if I could surmise, as far as I have heard, they did not want the population of Fukushima to go down. And he apparently mentioned it to the then Prime Minister. This is hearsay, so I think that that may have been the reason. Okay, thank you very much. So, shall we just keep going? Then, next question for Tanioka-san.
Act to support affected children does not function, and what is the biggest reason? I believe indirect reason is education, but I'd like to know the direct reason why this act does not function. Thank you very much for your question. You have got the point. So far, I tried to identify the conflict and I tried to identify what is the reason for malfunction of this act. However, we shouldn't wait till counterpart change because anything or nothing will change, and therefore we have to think about how general public we have to change, and the one word is the sabotage of the bureaucrats. And of course there are many players behind the scene, therefore so-called nuclear power plant village. And then under the safety myths, there are people who had benefited from the nuclear power generation village, and they have vested interest, and they secure their vested interest by doing anything they can do. And the reoperation of the NPP, that the other concerns related. Thank you very much. And I have a question to Mr. Tanioka. Following as a follow-up question, you mentioned the sabotage of bureaucrats. In order to prevent such sabotage of bureaucrats, we have a question. The question says that which way the bureaucrats is looking into the politics on the time or the future. Or other question is that the now they act to support the victims are bondless. And what do you think about that? And I believe there should be answers for this, and all of them are follow-up questions as to the prevention of sabotage of bureaucrats. What's your view on that?
Well, how should I say? They are the one who's deceiving the people. It has been a lesson for them the past 3.5 years, and they learn much faster. They're much faster learner in deceiving people than us trying to counter that. They had much more power, much more authority, and money. That's what I've noticed. As we learned today, in so many areas, and as we learned from Oshidori-san's speech, there were so many efforts everywhere so that the necessary information does not get disseminated to the public. There has been walls and blockages that were created. The risk communication or so-called risk communications be undertaken in a reverse manner. And if I had the answer, I'd be very happy. I would like to know that. When I was a politician, I said, before you talk about your education to the people, before you talk about ethics for the people, you should focus on your bureaucracy, and you should really think about where they should be headed and where they should be focusing on. That's what I said to former Prime Minister. But he said he agreed with me, but nothing has been done. So I really wish I had the answer. I'm sorry. Thank you very much for the very honest answer. And I also would like to know, and I've been seeking the answer every day. I'd like to move on to a question to Matsuda-san. Those people who have no intention of going back, I believe that's not evacuation, but that's rather migration. Some people who are living in Kyushu and then they actually move abroad. Would they be included? Well, as I said in the beginning, those people who think that they will be re-established in another territory, those are definitely people who exist, but should they be included in the statistic? Well, I don't know if those people are actually included in the reconstruction agency statistics, because that really depends on who's taking the data, the initial primary data. Now, some people just move out of this jurisdiction and move to a new prefecture, for example, or a new ward, and they say that, well, I did move my the actual registration, but then they can still request to receive information as an evacuee, and it might be the case that these people could be counted as an evacuee. But those people who have completely removed their names from the initial ward or prefecture's registration, and who have probably bought the house elsewhere, maybe they might not be included. It's not about including these initial cases or not. What I wanted to really point out is the complexity of the issue of the fact that there are so many different kind of evacuees, and that's what I would like to include in the white paper. That also includes for the people who moved abroad.
Next is a question to Shishiro-san. We'll just keep going. So, people who are still in their hometowns, I've heard that they feel like they might be threatened, so they're not able to speak freely. You are now outside of Fukushima. Is that why you are able to speak publicly? The people who are still back home, when it comes to their statements, even if you're just talking to neighbors, you never know who might get a hold of that information and then how that might affect you. So it happens in, I think that it's very dangerous unless you're prepared to break ties with your town community association. It's true, it's easier to speak out having left, but even if you leave, there could be some kind of a backlash against neighbors, relatives, or families. There's no guarantee that there will not be a backlash of the people that I was close to. So emotionally, it's easier for me, but there's no guarantee that the people who were close to me have not been affected by a backlash. So I still, personally, I feel inhibited still. I see. Thank you very much. So next question to Tanioka-san.
The so-called nuclear-powered generation villages was implemented in what form by the Democratic Party of Japan. I believe you represent the ruling party back then, and you had such a direct question, but can you please answer to this? Thank you very much for your question. As to this problem, in the past, among many Democratic Party of Japan Parliament members, in order to oppose the reoperation, I garnered signage or signs of the Democratic Party of Japan, and there are some colleague members who had signed it, and they didn't cave in those pressures, in my impression. However, those who did not sign to that opposition letter, in some ways, I believe they were exposed to some form of pressures, and many of them are really diverse. For example, if they were ex-bureaucrat, there is a connection as the ex-bureaucrat, and then some regions and communities. There is a pressure imposed by the business operators of the nuclear power generation villages. In addition to that argument of electricity, and some of them get the support from the electricity community, and actually they wanted to sign to the opposition letter. However, they couldn't, and actually they confessed it to me. And in what way, what kind of pressure they got in a specific manner, I don't know it. Therefore, what I said is just my guess. Thank you very much for really candid opinions about it.
Now, another question to Matsuda-san. The reason why you don't define the evacuees does it have something to do with the fact of compensation, the need of compensation? Well, yes. The reason why government is not defining the evacuees in a clear manner, well, I don't think there is a malicious intention that has to do with compensation, but I think my colleague here mentioned about sabotage, and I think that is more about it. I think they have abandoned the effort to come up with a clear definition. I think that is closer to that reality. Perhaps maybe you could add some words. I also agree that that's the situation. So then moving on to the next.
Next question is for Shishiro-san. So using schoolyards, most schoolyards would not be, or most schools would not be able to resume if the criteria was 10, but if it were 20, then most schools would be able to reopen. So did this idea come from the education ministry or was it Fukushima prefecture? Well, 10 milli versus 20 milli. Fukushima prefecture said that now that it's 20 milli per year, all of the schools from elementary, junior high, and high school could conduct school activities as normal. And that was what they shared with the education board. But all of the schools, even though they reopened, they tried to minimize usage of their school yard. So that's not in accordance with what the prefecture said. So I actually took that to be that it was Fukushima prefecture that took the measurements of 10 versus 20 and then made that decision. I see. Next question.
Next question came from Twitter. Right now they use this information is available across the nation, and then we got a question to Mr. Tanioka from Twitter. And the next general election, do you want to run for the next general election? Actually, it's right now no intention to run for the election. Next means when? You mean the current election campaign? It must be too difficult for you to express your intention at any rate. Can you please tease out something? When I look at the current political situation, as I mentioned in my presentation, the role I have to assume right now is to save the young generation as much as possible. They have kind of resigned to take part in the political activities, but we have to attract them to get involved in the political activities, because if everything is left intact, the current condition will remain without changing at all. For example, those who receive so-called the bribery will reign the government, and I'd like to change the situation by by asking the young generation to get on board. Therefore, for the future, I have to nurture and grow the good voters with discerning eyes, and I want you to collaborate with me to garner the support of the next generation. Thank you.
Next question to Matsuda-san, but perhaps Shishiro-san can answer as well. Wide area evacuees, and also there are people who are still living in Fukushima, knowing the risk. I believe that they're talking about the people who are still living in the disaster-afflicted area with certain risk. What is the relationship that currently is being maintained between these people who are evacuated and those who remain? And if there is no relationship anymore, if there is a complete separation of these two groups of people, is it because of the compensation, different level of compensation? Well, those people who didn't make any physical movement or evacuation, and those people who are still living in the area, disaster-affected area, knowing the risk. I know about these people, and the white paper that we are trying to prepare, actually, we are trying to make sure that this white paper encompasses these people who are still in the area, because we do get criticism or question about the coverage of the white paper, and we want to make sure that we include these people. Like, for example, if we try to cover the different types of evacuees, and we'd like to cover that on the white paper as well as in the interview as well. Thank you for your answer. And Shishiro-san, can you also comment? Well, first of all, some people who are aware of the risk to a certain extent, keep saying that they are aware of the risk, but they're still living in Nakadori. I think it's a very difficult thing to do. And the actual evacuation or moving away from that area is, in a way, an expression of the acknowledgement of the risk. And I think if there is a connection between these two groups of people, well, then a great situation might happen. Like the people who are still living in Fukushima area might get a negative influence. I know I still contact with some people in Fukushima, but these people are actually saying or thinking that they don't want other people, their neighbors, to know that they are in contact with myself. So that is the situation. I understand. Thank you.
先の方々とけど女性保護という意思も持ちながら、
So some people who have evacuated and some people who are still living in Fukushima. I think I know that there are some efforts to connect these people. There are various efforts, but I think it's a very deep discussion, and I think it's a very difficult question.
One question to Tanioka-san. So the group that you had, Aichikara, you have young people living in Date and other areas, and I understand that there was no support for them. So I wanted to understand if you were aware of the real conditions since you were involved in the establishment of the victim support law. We have been providing support from Aichi. So the office that Aichikara, the group, is using is actually an office in my hometown, which I used to use when I was a lawmaker, and I'm still supporting the back office operations. However, all of the work that they do, they decide on their own. So it's not as if I provide any kind of instructions for them to what to do. I want to really respect their sovereignty and autonomy. So I believe that they can do something that is good and supportive. As for the dangers involved, certainly for me personally, what are radioactive substances? You can't say for sure that they're dangerous, or you can't say for sure that they are not dangerous. I try to provide as much information as possible for something that needs to be thought over, but how much of that do they understand, or how much of that is reflected in their actions? I think that is up to each individual. I'm not sure if that helps to answer your question. I think that this is a very important point, so let me add a little bit. Because disclosing information and then having the individual make their decisions, I think that Tanioka-san, that's the way you think. And that's probably how the support law for child victims operates. And I think half of you probably agree with that, but maybe the other half thinks that one should say more strongly, this is a dangerous area, so people should stay out, and there should be something more clearly indicated. So I think that there are two different camps, even in the people who are trying to provide assistance, and it's not like one is right, the other is wrong, but I think that one thing unique about this conference is that we have people who represent both parties attending, and that shows us the potential of this conference. So we'd like to conclude session 2 with one last question.
Question, including myself. There are three speakers, and this is a question to all of the four people, including myself. And that's like there is a sociologist meeting, and then as the spontaneous voluntary evacuees do not ring the bell, according to the audience, and this is called IDP. And this is a question raised at the Switzerland Symposium. And what do you think about that? Mr. Shishido, you yourself as an evacuee, rather than called the voluntary evacuees, if you are called IDP, do you have any strange feeling? To me, I don't have any strange feeling about it, personally speaking. However, the people surrounding me do not evacuate, and what is the difference between me and you? And this is based on my own decision. Therefore, in that sense, I think this is spontaneous or voluntary. And then we are internally displaced person. If they want to call us as refugees, yes, they can do that. However, whether you ask me whether we want to apply for the IDP application, no, we don't want to do that. So IDP is the refugees who do not cross the borders. So in that sense, refugees they can be used. And what do you think about that, Mr. Hiroka, based on your rich experiences in international issues? This is really complicated because if you remember what I said to the victims with really harsh words, for example, sense of ownership and the power to take action, I said these were the points for the future, and actually the emotions and affections to the people surrounding you, we cannot make any action at all. And if you interpret them positively, we are caught by affections and goodwill. If you think about all of the people, you cannot do anything because of the goodwill. You cannot do anything, and actually, goodwill sometimes serve as the barriers. And I feel it, and I believe many people have felt it that way. And then you can ignore the formality in such a situation, and this is what I want to say to you. In the formality, yes, you have to call them at the IDP, internally displaced person, based on the global standard and the discussions and the discourses of academia. I would say that they are classified as IDPs. However, you have to ask their opinions, what they are called and how they are treated, regardless of the formality. If you ignore them, you should not determine or impose the classification on them, and if you do that, it's totally meaningless as an argument. You have to ask the actual people that and how they are regarded and then how they want to be called. You have to ask it to the people. Yes, well, I was not knowledgeable of the any international issues, but when I started working on evacuation and evacuees, I learned about the definition of IDP, and I felt that that definition is very close to the reality of Fukushima. So I did dug deeper and studied. But what do they think they feel? Well, more ordinary Japanese people feel a bit of distance between themselves and displaced people or refugees. So I think most of the people would not feel that definition would apply to them. Well, also the definition of IDP is extremely difficult compared to an ordinary refugees. The structural definition has only recently been established. In that sense, their situation is very much like the people in Fukushima. And just like in the case of Fukushima, most of the IDPs actually continue to face issues once they return home. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from the situation of IDP. And when I looked at the researchers who focus on IDP issues, if we look at the legal system in Japan in case of the disasters, there is a clear definition of what the government and authority have to do, but there is a very not basically nothing regarding what the evacuees, the refugees should do. And I think that's something that we need to work on, and I think that there should be an external pressure, international pressure, to change such system in Japan. So all the three presenters answered the question to the question very clearly. So I don't think I have to add much. But the thing is that the support to the evacuees and people who are afflicted are undertaken in a quite distorted manner, and that is the reality of what we are seeing in Japan. And within this backdrop, we could perhaps utilize the definition of IDP in order to connect this issue to a more internationally debated issue. I think that was what the person who asked the question wanted to say. And if that is the intention of the question, I can say that I agree with that person. I agree that we should utilize the definition of IDP, and I think that's something that we could consider. But first and foremost, we need to discuss this and think about this with the actual evacuees or the people who are afflicted. I got so many questions, and unfortunately I cannot cover all of them. I only covered about 50%. I make sure to hand these questions to the persons who are running the roundtable discussion tomorrow. So if there's time tomorrow, hopefully these will be answered. Thank you very much. So I'd like to take 15 minutes break from now, and we will resume the session 3 at 10 past 4. Thank you very much.